Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, COVID-19 Vaccines and Food Allergy, Get the Facts. I'm Jennifer Gertz, Executive Director of Food Allergy Canada, and for those of you who are familiar with our organization, you know that we are a registered charity that focuses on providing education and support for those impacted by food allergy and acting as a national voice on key patient issues. Many of us have seen conflicting information in the media regarding the suitability of the COVID-19 vaccine for those with food allergy and a history of severe allergic reactions. And this is what prompted our organization to reach out to the medical experts and to Health Canada to request their help in sorting through the sea of information so that we can make informed decisions on whether to take the vaccine when it's made available. I'm very pleased to have three experts joining us here today to answer our questions. But before I introduce our guests, a couple of housekeeping notes and a poll question to get a sense of where people are at on this topic. Firstly, note that this session is for informational purposes only and will not provide specific individual medical advice. Please do talk to your doctors about any specific concerns or questions that you may have regarding your own health or the health of your child. We'd like to thank everyone for submitting questions on registration. With over 1,000 questions received, we've synthesized them, and not surprisingly, there are some common themes which we will begin to tackle in today's session. So, on to the poll question. All of you have joined our session today because you likely have questions. With our webinars, we like to do a poll question to get a sense of where the audience is at, and then at the end, we'll also do the same poll question to determine which questions we've answered and if we've helped support your decision making. So if we can put the poll question up. So the poll question is, do you have the information you need to confidently make a decision on taking the vaccine? So please select yes, no, unsure. If you can make a note of your response. All right. So unfortunately on my end, I'm having some technical difficulties and I'm not seeing the response, but I understand there has been some responses made. So I'm going to continue to go on, and that might be an internet connection issue on my end, but let's go to the second poll question. How hesitant are you in your decision making to take the COVID-19 vaccine? Very hesitant, somewhat hesitant, not at all. All right. Okay, well, thank you very much for your responses. From the questions that were submitted, 3 priority themes have emerged, and so that's what we're going to tackle today. The approval process for current vaccines is one area, and what's the safety picture, especially with the speed in which this approval happened. The second is who should and shouldn't get the vaccines, and the third is understanding adverse reactions. As I mentioned, we have 3 panelists to help us, and I would like to invite our panelists to turn their webcams on. All right, thank you. So let me introduce our panelists. We have Dr. Megan Battle from Health Canada. She has a background as a researcher in molecular biology and is the Director General of the COVID-19 Regulatory Response Team and for the Health Products and Food Branch. Welcome, Dr. Battle. We also have Dr. Zain Chagla. He's a specialist in infectious disease and is a consultant physician at St. Joseph's Hospital and the Hamilton Health Services in Ontario. He's also an associate professor of medicine at McMaster University. You may have heard of Dr. Chagla or read about him in the media as he's a sought after expert in the area of COVID-19. So thank you, Dr. Chagla. And lastly, we're very fortunate to have Dr. Alyssa Abrams to join us. Dr. Abrams is a Canadian allergist and the chair of the Anaphylaxis and Food Allergy section of the Canadian Society of Allergy and Clinical Immunology, and is also an assistant professor at the University of Manitoba. So let's get started. Let's actually start with the 2 big questions that really came through from our responses, and then let's dig into the background to help substantiate those answers. So I'm going to turn to you, Dr. Abrams, as the allergist. If I have a food allergy, am I eligible to receive the vaccines, the approved vaccines, and is this vaccine safe for me? Dr. Abrams?
So that's a great question. And the short answer is yes, you are eligible. And yes, it is safe for you to receive. So food allergy is not considered in any way right now to increase your risk from this vaccine.
Terrific. All right. Okay, so let's dig into our first topic area around the approval process. And so, we've got 2 approved vaccines that are in the Canadian, or have been approved within Canada, and they seem to have been developed awfully fast, Dr. Bettel. So can you walk us through the process that the Canadian regulators take to help understand the safety, efficacy, and quality of these vaccines?
Sure. So I think we were going to put up a graphic that shows some of the pictures, and I can talk through some of the steps. I mean, I think one of the big messages is that, new vaccines are not brand new. There's been a huge amount, decades of research that have gone into developing kind of these types of vaccines, and previous research has been done for related viruses such as SARS and MERS. So there's been a lot of research already that set the stage for being able to address this new virus really quickly. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of normal processes for how vaccines are developed and what's changed to make this really quick. So first of all, as I said, there's the basic research identifying the virus and identifying parts of the virus that will make a good vaccine. Long before a vaccine goes into humans, there's a lot of study both in cells and in animals to test, is it safe? Does it create an immune response? Is it likely to be a good vaccine? And that's been done extensively for the COVID-19 vaccines. Once the initial safety and initial development in animals has been done, then scientists will go to regulators and seek permission to start clinical trials in humans. And the clinical trials go through a number of phases, initially starting with a very small group of young, healthy people, maybe even just a couple at a time to get the vaccine and to test. And these people are monitored very carefully to see that things are safe. After the initial very small safety studies, then we can start to expand the population to go into bigger trials and to look more at, does the vaccine produce an immune response? What's the best dose? And always, is it safe in each of the trial participants? So at each step, before you go into bigger and bigger groups of people, there are assessments of the safety. So that's monitored very closely by regulators all the way along. There are independent safety monitoring boards who are looking at any reports of adverse events and monitoring this very carefully. So as we go along, again, starting from very young, healthy people, as the groups of people who are, as the trials get larger, the type of people that the eligibility of people in these trials gets broader and broader too. So they start to include people who are older or people who have other medical conditions until we get to the phase 3 trials. So the phase 3 trials are really the big assessments of whether or not a vaccine prevents disease. So for the 2 authorized COVID vaccines, these trials have had 30 to 40,000 people in them. These are placebo-controlled, so half the people get the vaccine, half the people get kind of a dummy vaccination, and nobody knows until the results are finished who's got what. But in those big trials, what is being looked for is whether people are protected from developing COVID-19. And what we've seen with the phase 3 trials for the 2 approved vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, is that these vaccines were very effective in preventing people from getting sick. So normally what happens is all of these stages, so in normal drug development, all of these stages go one right after the other. They can be quite slow. And then all of that data is pulled together and there's one application made to Health Canada. In this situation, it's gone much more quickly. First of all, as I said, there was a lot of research done previously. Second, there was a lot of funding provided to support clinical trials. So there's been huge investment in making these in allowing these trials to go forward quickly, and that's helped kind of speed up the process. Manufacturers have also used kind of different clinical trial designs that have, rather than doing one stage and then the next and the next, these clinical trials have kind of gone smoothly from one stage to the other, still with the same monitoring for safety, but it's just kind of sped up the process all the way along. What Health Canada has done through this is, instead of waiting until the very end when all of the studies were done, we've allowed manufacturers to give us their data as soon as it was available. So when the animal studies were done, the manufacturer could give that data to us so that we could start looking at it earlier in the process. And so our overall review time would be sped up. So if you go down to the second half of the slide, I don't know if you can scroll down, but basically it's kind of talking about that review process. So as I said, we started as early as possible. We threw a lot of people at the review of these vaccines, and you know, regulators worldwide have been sharing information and talking about the science for months, and working together to review these vaccines. And then we've got to the point where we have enough data where we've been able to say, right, it's safe. We know that it works to prevent disease, and that it's manufactured really well. That's an important part of the review. We need to know that it's consistent and it will be the same every time, so it should work the same every time. And then that led us to the point where we could make a decision to approve a vaccine. All of these approvals are being done with terms and conditions. So what that means is we're letting them come onto the Canadian market, but we have requirements for all of the manufacturers to keep giving us data. So as their trials continue, as more information about the safety continues, all of that is being provided to Health Canada so that we can look at it as soon as it's available, and we can keep a very close eye on what's happening as the vaccines are going out in the real world. Great. So I think I'll stop there. We can go on.
Well, I'd actually like to ask Dr. Chaglit to just lean in on this question as well around speed, because we are talking also about kind of a new format. I mean, when we talk about mRNA, you know, when it's something that's new, it feels like it should have more time. Can you help us, the audience, understand a little bit more around that concern?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, everyone there's obviously some hesitation around how fast this occurred, and I think Dr. Beadle has explained why the process to approval has been relatively quick. It's important to remember mRNA vaccines have been experimented with and used in phase 1 trials since basically 2016. There have been trials about mRNA vaccines around influenza, around Zika virus. And so, you know, this platform was always there to begin with for this reason. It was developed to be a rapid platform where one could develop a vaccine to a novel pathogen if you were to figure out what causes the immune response to that pathogen and reverse engineer from there. It could be one that's scaled up very quickly. The other part of this, you know, the number of people that have gone into the phase 3 trials here in the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine, if you add them up, that's over 75,000 individuals that went through phase 3 trials. And to put it in perspective, the last major immunization that was approved, the shingles vaccine, had I think about a quarter or even less of the individuals that were actually put into the phase 3 trial for Shingrix, which is an incredibly effective vaccine. But, you know, again, in the grand context, there are significantly more people that have seen a COVID-19 vaccine in clinical trials. The other part, you know, and going back to that shingles example, often these trials take a little bit of time when you're doing a phase 3 trials for vaccines, because you have to wait for someone to actually develop the disease of interest, right? So if you talk about shingles, which is a remanifestation of chickenpox that's later in life as it reactivates, you have to give the vaccine to people, you have to wait till they get shingles, and then you have to analyze them after a set period, which sometimes can be 5, 10, 15 years or never happen in that person's lifetime. Unfortunately, the world situation as it is we're giving the vaccine to people waiting for them to get COVID-19, but given the global pandemic and how much burden it is, particularly in places like Brazil and the United States and South Africa, where many of these vaccines were studied, in the UK, it's unfortunate, but people are developing COVID-19 at a fairly rapid pace in that sense. So you're getting to as many outcomes that are specified that you're trying to get to at the end of the trial pretty quickly, because it's around us and that's the world we live in. So, again, the number of people included in the trial, the number of outcomes in the trial are probably more than any vaccine we've approved in the recent 10 years. And again, the speed of it really is unfortunately part of this global pandemic, as many people are being exposed to COVID-19.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. So now we've got the 2 approved vaccines. We've got some others that are in the pipeline. Dr. Bettel, can you talk to us about who is eligible? Like who's the current vaccines? Who are they authorized for?
Yeah, so they're fairly similar, but some slight differences. So the Pfizer vaccine was authorized for people from age 16 and older. So the clinical trials for Pfizer's vaccine did include kind of younger people, and there was enough evidence when we had that submission to make the decision that it was okay to go down to 16 and over. The Moderna vaccine is for adults 18 and over. So what we approve is based on the data that we receive. There are certainly ongoing trials with younger kids for these 2 vaccines, as well as the other ones which are in development. So we'll expect to see that data will become available, and then we'll be able to look to see if it's safe and it works in children as well. And at that point, we can, if we do that assessment, then the indications for use can be broadened.
Right. Okay. Now. And sorry, and is the safety and efficacy of these vaccines kind of the same regardless of the profile of the individual? Like, should you be happy to just get any one of the vaccines that are available or that are coming available, or should you be thinking about, no, this is the right one for me?
Well, I think at this point we don't have a whole lot of information to say that one vaccine is better for a particular population than other. So, it was a pretty broad group of people who were included in the clinical trials, people who were older, people who had other medical conditions, and that was deliberate, right? So it was a broad population of people who were included in the trials. And for the 2 mRNA vaccines, the efficacy and the safety are really quite similar.
Okay. Okay. And then what's your bet, if you can, I guess maybe that's not a fair question, on when they will have something that's approved for kids under the age of 16?
Oh, I wish I knew.
Does anyone on our panel want to lean in on that?
No, I mean, the trials are ongoing. I've read some news stories that says that Pfizer has fully enrolled their 12 to 15 age group already. Moderna's 12 and up trial began in December. So I would hope that we would start to see data from those trials coming in the next few months.
Great. And what about the variants? Like when we see these new variants, do we have a perspective on the efficacy against the new variants of COVID?
Yeah, so we're definitely looking at that very, very closely. I mean, obviously viruses change, and the more you sequence them, the more differences you find. So there are hundreds of variants, and we don't know very much about them. So I mean, that's a worry, and it kind of points to why it would be good to get as many people vaccinated as possible to guard against that. Okay. We have asked all of the manufacturers to provide us with data about how well they expect their vaccines to work against different variants, and a lot of that research is going on right now to look at efficacy. We're starting to see from some of the ongoing clinical trials for other vaccines where they've done their trials, say in the UK and in South Africa. We're seeing reports of different efficacy in different areas, and that suggests that there will be differences depending on the variant of the virus that's circulating. So, I mean, there's an ongoing discussion about at what point do you need to tweak the vaccine. So I think there'll be a lot of work looking at, how do we make sure that the vaccines continue to be effective against the potential variants that are likely to emerge.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Okay. I want to move on to our next topic around who should and shouldn't get the vaccine. Now, the community that is impacted by food allergy has a history of not necessarily being eligible for vaccines. So like when you consider the past guidance for those with egg allergy and the flu vaccine, for instance. So, you know, I want to turn to our allergist and kind of narrow in on those living with food allergy and perhaps other allergies. What is the guidance, Dr. Abrams, from the experts, from the Canadian Society of Allergy and Clinical Immunology, on who should and shouldn't get this vaccine within our community?
Okay, so for the vast majority of the allergic community, it is absolutely safe to receive this vaccine. The only group that should speak to their allergist before receiving the vaccine would be people who have either reacted to the first dose of the COVID vaccine or people who have a potential or known allergy to a component of the vaccine. Other than that, things like food allergy, other drug allergy, stinging insect allergy, environmental allergy, all those things are considered safe for receiving the vaccine.
Okay, so it doesn't matter if it's a peanut allergy, a tree nut allergy, any of the priority allergens or non-priority food allergens. What you're saying is it's not a food thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So it doesn't matter if it's milk or egg or peanut, it doesn't matter how severe it is or when you were diagnosed. If you have a food allergy, you can receive the vaccine.
Okay. Now, what about someone who's avoided the flu vaccine due to an egg allergy? Do they have to avoid the COVID vaccination?
Absolutely not. And in fact, at this stage, they don't have to avoid the flu vaccine either. But specifically to the COVID vaccine, no, they do not. They can also receive the COVID vaccine.
Okay. Now, we received several questions about non-food allergies, and I know you touched on a little bit, but I want to go back over it again, and other atopic conditions. So asthma, environmental allergies, latex. Can you talk to us about, you know, are those groups that should avoid the COVID vaccine?
Absolutely not. So whether it's asthma or hay fever or eczema or stinging insect allergy or environmental allergy, those groups can absolutely receive the vaccine. The only people who should really speak to an allergist before getting the vaccine are people who have already reacted to a dose or people who are allergic to a component of the vaccine itself.
Okay, and latex is not considered an issue with this. Like there's not, because we've seen that in the media a little bit about latex. I don't know, Dr. Chagla, if you also want to lean in on the latex conversation.
Yeah, I believe, and I will have to, I have to apologize. I believe latex is not a part of the components in the manufacture, but I will have to double check. I don't think they use I don't think they're using latex stoppers.
Yeah. Okay. Dr. Battle and Dr. Abram, I see you shaking your head. Latex is not an issue. Okay.
No, there's no latex in the packaging or in the manufacturer.
Right. Okay. Okay. Now, the other thing that we've heard a little bit about, Dr. Abrams, is this whole immunocompromised, right? And this terminology that's out there. And those with food allergy, we recognize that reactions evolve the immune system. But if I have a food allergy, does it mean I'm immunocompromised? And is that a problem for the vaccine?
So absolutely not. If you have a food allergy, you are not considered immunocompromised. It doesn't change whether you can get the vaccine. Similarly, I know there's been some questions around immunotherapy. If you're on oral immunotherapy, right, for example, for foods, does that make you immunocompromised? The answer is once again, absolutely not.
Okay. Okay, well, so then let's move on to the conversation about ingredients, because if that's the indication, if you're allergic to ingredients, let's start by understanding the ingredients. Now, again, our community is accustomed to reading labels, and that's a mechanism to make sure that food is safe, but this label is pretty hard to interpret. So maybe Dr. Battle, if I can start with you to talk to us about the ingredients. And I think we've heard this, but let's confirm it again.
Sure. So, I mean, first thing, we can talk about what's not in there. There are no eggs, there are no animal products, there are no nuts, there are no fish products. These vaccines are actually pretty simple. So they've got the messenger RNA, which is a molecule that's found in all of your cells. They have some fats which protect the messenger RNA, and again, there's nothing. There's no protein in that, so that shouldn't be allergenic. And there is a molecule, which is a polyethylene glycol, which is part of the formulation, and I'll let my colleagues here talk about that a little bit more. But the normal sort of allergens that people would be worried about are not present in these vaccines.
Okay, so let's talk about polyethylene. I'm probably not going to get that right. I'm just going to call it PEG, okay? So, you know, that Dr. Chegla, it seems like that's what's causing or that's what's generating what they think are the issues. Talk to us about that and help us understand where is where is that kind of where is PEG? Where would we find that? What type of products have that?
Yeah, so PEG is a compound that people can occasionally have allergic reactions to. It is a very common compound to be found in the world. So generic medications, many bath and body products, a number of other medications would contain PEG, and so it would be uncommon for someone to have a undefined PEG reaction into adulthood without ever seeing one of these products prior. With that being said, you know, there is described allergies to PEG, and so people that have had allergies potentially could react to this. But again, it is a very uncommon allergy, and on top of that, it is a very, very common product to be found in the general market. Many people are exposed to it through their daily lives, and again, consuming generic medications, over-the-counter Tylenol, that type of thing. Dr. Abrams, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Sure. So I completely agree with you. This product is absolutely everywhere. And while there have been allergies reported, if you look back in sort of the medical research on this, it's exceptionally rare to have a reported allergy to PEG. This is sort of, you know, 4 or 5 people reported in one study, that sort of level. So yes, it's possible. And yes, as of now, that's what's been identified as the most likely potential culprit. But I think this remains an evolving conversation around what's potentially causing these reactions.
All right, and to further to that, can you test for a PEG allergy?
So there have been protocols for testing that have been described, and I know that there are groups working on that within the allergy community right now. But one of the take-home messages is that we're still not sure just how reliable or accurate or feasible this testing will be. And so as a result, if you have a suspected allergy to PEG, I'd say speak to your allergist, and they can help you figure out the next steps and whether it is a true reaction or not, whether you should stay away from the vaccine or not. But the risk of being allergic to PEG is exceptionally low.
Okay, great. Okay. I've got a few more questions, eligibility questions that I'd like to ask before we go on to the section on adverse reactions. And I'm going to, and they're not necessarily specific to food allergies. So Dr. Chegla, I'm going to send those questions your way, but certainly they've come up. So we'd like to be able to offer some advice to, or some perspectives to our audience. So what is the perspective on the COVID-19 vaccine for those who are breastfeeding or pregnant?
Yeah, so this is a very common question. And unfortunately, the clinical trials that were done, both for Moderna and Pfizer, did not include pregnant or breastfeeding women. This is not abnormal. Most medicated products in their first trials will not include pregnant or breastfeeding women because it is such a vulnerable population. And if there were anything to go wrong, you would not want to impact that particular population. And so the decision from the regulators, obviously, is to not necessarily give the vaccine to people that it hasn't been trialed on. That being said, we do know that pregnancy and breastfeeding does predispose people to a slightly worse, or pregnancy particularly, not necessarily breastfeeding, but pregnancy in particular can predispose people to a slightly worse outcome of COVID-19, particularly hospitalization and critical care stay. It's not a high percentage, but more than peers of their age. It tends to be in women as well that have underlying medical issues in their pregnancy that tend to get hospitalized or need a critical care stay. And so many organizations and professional bodies have really left it as a risk-benefit decision between women, their exposure risk, and their considerations for these vaccines. And so there's no hard and fast rule. There are certainly pregnant women who are at high risk in terms of their occupation that have considered and taken the vaccine. There is unfortunately no data about fetal outcomes. By the mechanism of this vaccine, given that it is, essentially an mRNA vaccine that makes a protein, it shouldn't predispose to any teratogenic effects, but we just don't know that in perpetuity today. From a breastfeeding standpoint, it's even lower risk, as many of these compounds don't even aren't even expressed in breast milk, and the dose of the vaccine is incredibly small at that point. And to take it as another principle, we do give things like, in fact, encourage influenza vaccine during pregnancy, as it may predispose to better antibody levels in the baby. We, encourage pertussis vaccine in pregnancy, as it may offer some extra fetal protection as well as prevention from mother to child spread after pregnancy. And so there is certainly a precedent to immunizing pregnant women outside of the context of what's been shown in clinical trials. So,
Great.
for now, it is a risk and benefit discussion. There's no mechanistic reason why this shouldn't be safe in pregnancy, but it just has not been studied in that point. And women should consider making the decision based on the fact that, there may not be a lot of data in this context, but there is an increased risk of complications from natural COVID-19 in this context as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we also had some of our audience that have we're asking questions about some fairly specific medical conditions, and which may or may not fall into the category of immunocompromised or immunosuppressed. We know that Dr. Abrams addressed that, food allergy is not a condition that's immunocompromised, but we have people that are managing more than just food allergy. So the advice from Health Canada has been, talk to your healthcare provider. And so we did get some questions around, okay, if I'm going to my healthcare provider or to a vaccination clinic with some of these very specific questions, what's the advice to individuals in terms of what they should be, how they should be approaching this? And can you also speak to kind of how the on the ground healthcare professionals, whether it's the doctor's office or the vaccination clinics, become equipped with the information to help guide these questions? Dr. Chegla?
Yeah, it is very similar to pregnancy. So again, the concept in immunocompromised, again, is not necessarily around safety. Again, these vaccines were not trialed in these populations. There's nothing mechanistically that would be of concern in the platform, and we haven't necessarily generated the data in that sense. Live vaccinations, we do know that there are certain immunocompromised individuals that shouldn't receive live vaccinations, but this is not a live vaccination. And so, the major concern is only that, people may not get the efficacy that they would expect as a general person from these vaccines because of their states of immunosuppression. And these tend to be patients, who are getting chemotherapy, who are on biologic medications, who are on steroids or other chemotherapeutic agents, who have HIV that is not controlled, who have other conditions like transplantation or have active cancers. And in those individuals, there is some concern around this concept of not getting a great response. And so again, when you go to a vaccine center, when you talk to your practitioner, it is very similar to the pregnancy discussion. Is we don't have data in your population. There is an underlying risk of adverse outcomes if you do get COVID-19 in this population, but it has just not been studied in a group like yourself. Whether or not to get it is your personal decision, but just know all of these facts on the table in that sense and make an educated decision at that point. Again, much of this data is being sorted out in real time and will be more and more transparent as we have bigger and bigger and bigger populations vaccinated around the world. There is safety and efficacy data. There are populations in the UK and the US that are immunocompromised that are actually being prioritized for vaccination. So again, we will have more data as time comes. And again, this is the divide between what's approved and really kind of everyone else in the real world, is that people have to make informed decisions at that point, knowing that not all of the data is there, but also balancing against the risk of acquiring COVID in the interim while awaiting for that data to finally show up.
Terrific. Okay, thank you. So again, we're going to go on to adverse reactions, but I just noticed on the chat that we had a question of clarification on the ingredients piece, Dr. Bettel. Where can people access the ingredient information on the COVID-19, the approved vaccines?
So we have all of that information on the Health Canada webpage. I could actually provide some links that you maybe circulate after,
Okay.
but it's got a very clear list of what the ingredients are.
Great. Okay, we will for sure do that. Okay, so let's move on to the topic of adverse reactions. It's not hard to see some headlines on this, on adverse reactions, and so naturally, people are looking for the details and the facts behind it. So let's I'm going to again start with Dr. Chegla just to walk us through what are the side effects and adverse reactions, like what are they, and just how often are those happening?
So again, the phase 3 trials and much of the real world data has shown that there are expected adverse reactions or expected reactions. I wouldn't even say adverse reactions that are driven by the immune system seeing these mRNA and eventually the spike protein it generates and developing an immune response to this. So, these are actually reactions related to your immune system making the appropriate response to the vaccine. It is a little bit of a different point depending on people's genetics and other factors and how much they have in that sense. But the typical things, obviously a sore arm, which is typical for most vaccinations, but there are things like muscle aches, fevers, fatigue, just feeling lousy for a couple of days, which have been described. They are certainly more than something like the influenza vaccine, which do give you those symptoms, but less so. But actually, if you look at the scale, a little bit less than the shingles vaccine, which is actually much more immunogenic in that point. People can get a sore and red arm, temporarily. Most of these side effects do abate within 48 hours. But that certainly can be expected, and again is not necessarily an adverse reaction, is not a contraindication to get a second shot, is simply just a manifestation of the immune system reacting to the vaccine, which is exactly what it should be doing at that point.
Okay. Now, what about the rate of reactions that are happening? And is it different by the type of approved vaccine?
The Moderna and Pfizer vaccines have been pretty similar in terms of not allergic reactions, in terms of these expected reactions. We see about 80% getting a sore arm. When you talk about things like muscle pains and aches, it's about 10 to 20% of the population. It's a little bit higher for the second dose too, because often people are primed for it. So, their immune system is already ready to go and ramped up when they see the second shot. But yeah, the sore arm is very common. And again, those fevers and muscle pain symptoms, less common in the 10 to 20% range.
Okay. Okay. So for the very serious adverse reactions that we hear about in the media, Dr. Bettel, how are these being, or that are being reported, whether they actually are substantiated as a serious adverse reaction, I can't comment on, obviously, but how are adverse reactions being tracked by Health Canada?
Yeah, so there's a pretty detailed monitoring system looking for adverse reactions. Generally, so there are kind of two streams of information. So Health Canada requires manufacturers of vaccines to submit their adverse reactions to us. There are right now kind of individual adverse reactions, so very detailed reports. Anything a manufacturer gets, they need to submit to us. We also are requiring them to kind of give us monthly safety reports kind of for everything they've seen in the world, basically, to kind of analyze, roll up that information and present that to us. So that's one of the systems. So as these adverse events are reported, if there's anything unusual, our clinical team will look at them, will look at as much information as we have in those events and try to determine whether or not there's an actual relationship between an event and getting the vaccine. And that's one of the things that's really important is we actually want reporting of all sorts of events. What's most useful for us is to get as much information as possible, but quite a lot of what we see can't be attributed to a vaccine. So, but it needs to be assessed, and we need to look at it. So that's information coming in from the manufacturers. There's also a system of reporting adverse reactions through public health. So if you're a person in the general public, you have an adverse event, you're encouraged to report that through your doctor or another healthcare professional. And that's reported through your local public health system, and the provinces provide that data to the Public Health Agency of Canada. It's a bit complicated, and it's kind of a federal provincial healthcare system thing, which is weird. But what's important here is all of that information comes together. So Health Canada and the Public Health Agency, we work together. We look at all of these adverse events, and we make sure that there are no disturbing patterns, that you don't, if we see clusters of strange events that are associated with one lot of vaccine or in a specific place, we can take a really close look at that to see if there's anything unusual. So we are collecting all that information. We're actually posting statistics on our website so people can see numbers of events kind of in the context of how many people have been vaccinated. And we're making a lot of that information available so people can also be aware themselves of what's there. But I think the real point is all that information is coming in, and if there's anything unusual, it's being studied very quickly and very closely.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Okay, now I'd like to go to Dr. Abrams, just with some more conversations around kind of the rate of anaphylaxis and signs and symptoms of anaphylaxis. So can you talk to us about anaphylaxis and vaccine, and also remind the audience what the signs and symptoms are of anaphylaxis?
Sure, absolutely. So at a baseline, anaphylaxis, or a systemic allergic reaction to a vaccine, is considered a really, really rare event in general. And what you're looking for usually, if you call it a severe allergic reaction, is two parts of the body affected. So the most common would be the skin, and you're looking for things like hives or swelling. The next most common is usually the respiratory tract, or your breathing, coughing, wheezing. And then the third most common usually affected is the tummy, so vomiting or diarrhea. And usually it's two or more of those signs or symptoms to call it a systemic allergic reaction. The other important point, though, is that a lot of things can look like an allergic reaction, especially when you think about skin symptoms. And it's much more common to have a non-allergic reaction to the vaccine than it is to have a true allergic reaction to one.
Okay, perfect. Now, the vaccine rollout is going to occur obviously in the months ahead. And when it's time for someone to get vaccinated, what should people expect when it comes to safety protocols? Should people with food allergy or a history of anaphylaxis get vaccinated in a hospital versus or an allergist's office? Can you speak to that, Dr. Abrams?
Sure, absolutely. So no, they don't have to. Someone with food allergy or asthma or hay fever or eczema can get vaccinated in any community clinic, anywhere where the vaccine is offered, just like anybody else.
Okay. And then, and maybe Dr. Chegler or Dr. Bettel, what should people expect at the vaccination clinic itself, and their preparation to deal with anaphylaxis? I recognize it's rare, but what are the protocols that are in place?
So it's important to know every vaccine clinic for influenza, for other vaccines, every setting that potentially could use a vaccine is prepared to deal with anaphylaxis. So certainly with the COVID vaccine, there is a period of observation that's incorporated of 15 minutes or longer, depending on the clinic, where people are there, where they can access medical care and anaphylaxis care should the need arise. And looking at the data that's already shown up in the rare number of people that have gotten anaphylactic reactions to COVID-19 vaccines around the world, the vast majority are getting their symptoms within the first 15 minutes. So there is a period of observation. There is access to epinephrine on site and trained personnel that know how to administer it and monitor people afterwards. And so be rest assured that everywhere that is going to be giving a COVID-19 vaccination is also prepared to deal with anaphylaxis should the need arise.
Right. Okay. And so it's a 15-minute observation to potentially a half an hour observation that's in place.
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. And obviously we just lost Dr. Bettel. Hopefully you're still there on audio, Dr. Bettel.
Yeah, I'm still here on the phone, thanks.
Okay, now we had some other questions, and maybe Dr. Abrams, you can speak to this, but we've had some folks ask, should they use Benadryl in advance of their vaccination or any pain medication?
Okay, so from the perspective of antihistamines, it's absolutely not necessary to pre-treat. The risk of a systemic reaction is considered to be at present really, really low. So there's no need to pre-treat with anything. In terms of the first generation antihistamines or diphenhydramine or Benadryl, in general, from the allergy perspective, we recommend sort of staying away from that in general. It's sedating. And so if you're ever going to use an antihistamine to treat skin symptoms like hives, we recommend the newer antihistamines that don't cause sedation, that don't make you tired.
Okay. And Dr. Chagla, what about the idea of taking pain medication before?
Yeah, I mean, I would honestly consider waiting for it afterwards. Again, there's not a lot of data around what this looks like. There is a little bit of data in children that sometimes things like Tylenol may actually blunt the immune response a little bit. That being said, it's not very clear. Take it for symptoms if the symptoms are certainly there in that context. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily pre-take it in the context if people don't know necessarily what the end reaction will be.
Okay. Okay. We had another questions of clarification. It's again coming in on ingredients, and I don't know if we have the information available or one of our panelists do have this information available. But people are saying, you know, they can't understand what the ingredients are. Okay. And is there anybody that could, because they're very scientific terms, is there someone who could walk us through those ingredients, or can we follow up with something that would better help people understand the actual components? When you hear, well, don't take it if you're allergic to one of the components, and then when you kind of find the component list and you can't understand it, it still is causing some questions in people's minds. Do any of our panelists, like, is that a question that we can ask right now, or can we do a follow-on on that? I mean, it's very detailed. I don't know how many components we're talking about, whether it's 12 or 14, but sorry to put you on the spot, but is this something that we can
it's not
provide?
a large list, actually. It's not actually a large list, and you can generally group them. If someone could actually pull it up, it's only about 10 ingredients. You could walk through and just kind of point to what class they are and where it is. I wonder if even I can pull it up, actually.
I'm going to ask some of our folks that are running on the back end here whether
maybe
got
if
the
someone on the back
flexibility
end
to
can
do
pull
that.
it up. It's not a hard list to run through, and we can certainly talk about some of the stuff that's very common in part of most humans, and what might be what the PEG component is and the fat component is, as Dr. Bettel had mentioned.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask some of the folks that are in behind helping us out with this whether they can do that. But in the meantime, I'm going to go to another question, okay? And then if we can do that, we'll come back to it because I think the audience would find that quite helpful. So I want to go to the issue that happened in the UK on December, I guess it was December 8th or December 9th, when 2 healthcare workers reacted to the COVID-19 vaccine. The UK regulator then followed with guidance that said anyone who has a food allergy, a drug allergy, medication allergy, or a history of anaphylaxis this is not recommended. And I think that's really, frankly, what tripped up a lot of conversation on these vaccines for people with food allergy. I'd like to understand, and our viewing audience would like to understand, you know, so what's happened on that issue, and kind of what's the rest of the story that we didn't necessarily see covered in the media. So, Dr. Bettel, maybe I can turn to you first as the regulator, and then Dr. Chagla, I'll ask you for some comments on that as well.
Sure. So that was December 9th, because that was the day Health Canada was authorizing the Pfizer vaccine. So that was fun. So yes, so the UK had authorized the Pfizer vaccine about a week and a half beforehand. They'd started doing their general population rollout, and they did have these 2 events of anaphylaxis. As was publicized, they immediately changed their recommendations and said anybody who had a history of allergies should not receive the vaccine. I think they reacted very, very cautiously until they had a chance to investigate the events and to look at what was happening both in the UK and in other countries where the vaccines had started to be rolled out. And it wasn't very long afterwards until they actually changed their recommendation, so that the UK's recommendation is now the same as Canada's and for the US's, which is just that if you've had a reaction to that vaccine, you shouldn't get the second dose. But they had changed their recommendations for people who had other histories of allergy. So what I can say from the regulatory perspective is that all of the international regulators are talking together about vaccine safety all the time, sharing that information, and we're very confident that there's no abnormal signal with anaphylaxis with either of these vaccines. It'll continue to be monitored, but nobody's taking any additional measures at this point. So it's just something to be aware of as a very rare event. And as Dr. Chagla already said, every immunization site is prepared to deal with that.
Great. Okay. Thank you. I don't know if any of the other panelists have anything to add to that. Otherwise, okay,
the one thing I would say is, since Dr. Bettel had mentioned from December 9th, we now have, upwards of, I think, 20 or 30 million doses administered around the world of Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. And so, much of this data is becoming much more clear in larger and larger data sets. And the fact that many regulators have kind of kept this principle of people that are allergic to either getting the first dose of vaccine or a component of the vaccine is really telling, obviously, in that sense. It's very different than December 9th, when there was only, a couple of thousand individuals that had been vaccinated around the world. Now you have, almost the entire population of Canada vaccinated in the global experience, and you do have much more data around kind of the rate of allergy, which seems to be, in keeping with people with either components or to the native vaccine itself.
Okay, great. Okay, it sounds like some people have worked some masterful work in the background, and we do have a slide that we can share. So I'm going to, and this is on the ingredients, and then if we can have you speak to kind of what these are. So Dr. Chagla, do you want to walk us through this?
Sure. As Dr. Bettel had mentioned, the vaccine essentially, and this is I believe the ingredient list for Pfizer BioNTech, and the Moderna one is fairly similar. So certainly trends can be taken there. So again, the vaccine is mRNA wrapped up in a fat droplet that really, and then stabilized and then put into people basically. So you see the first ingredient is mRNA, which is the basis of how every living being on Earth makes its proteins. And so that should not be reactive to anyone in particular. These first four compounds going down the list, ALC, the phosphocholine, and cholesterol are all fat derivatives basically that are used to make a complex of fats that keep it through. And again, these are, they look like very big names. And the PEG is this second one here, the 2-polyethylene glycol. So these are the fat molecules and stabilizers that keep things together basically. The rest of the molecules essentially are salts. Water obviously is not non-reactive. Sucrose is sugar, sodium chloride is salt, potassium chloride is potassium, and then potassium phosphate and sodium phosphate are essentially salt buffers. These are found in a variety of natural ingredient substances, things like soda, medications, that type of thing, and so are fairly non-reactive in that sense. They're typical salts that people would encounter either through medications or other food products in that sense. So you really just have the fats and cholesterol, the PEG component as that second, mRNA, and then water and sugar basically.
Okay, now let's take a look at the Moderna. I think they've got that as well. So anything different there to point out?
Yeah, no, very similar, right? So you have mRNA, acetic acid, which is vinegar, again, the glycerophosphocholene, cholesterol, lipid, and PEG, and the PEG being the immunogenic one. And then many of these are either just stabilizers, and again, I think trimethoprim is an septic, I think. But again, these are relatively common components otherwise in that sense that you would find in everyday medications. And again, the fats. Again, the PEG compound is the one that sticks out on both of them, which may be cross-reactive to both.
Okay. And then with the fats that are in there, where are the fats derived from? Does that question make, I'm not sure that that question makes sense, but that's one of the questions that we received.
Yeah, so from my understanding, they're not mammalian fats. Like they're not derived from animals. They're lab synthesized fats more than anything else.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you for, I realize we put you on the spot, and thanks to our group behind the scenes who were able to pull up those ingredient statements. I'd like to be able to, we're coming up close to the hour, and I'd like to give our panelists the opportunity to provide opportunity to kind of give one or two key takeaway messages. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Bettel.
Okay. So I think what I would say is what we just mentioned. So we started off with a very relatively, they were brand new vaccines being introduced in the market, and I can understand that people had a lot of questions. And we've now got to the space where they've been given to millions of people. So I think we hit 10 million people in the UK over the weekend. One of those was my mother-in-law, and I'm super happy that she was able to get that vaccination because I'm very confident in the safety and the efficacy of these vaccines. So I'll leave you with that.
Okay, Dr. Chagla.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we are in very different times, and much of this does seem rushed. I think people also need to take a value judgment of what COVID-19 actually looks like for people. And as much as we think of it as a benign illness, as we're talking about the rate of anaphylaxis to some of these vaccines, it is still thousands of times higher that even a healthy young person could die of COVID-19 as opposed to having an anaphylactic reaction to one of the vaccines. And unfortunately, the world we live in these days, it's getting more and more common for one person to get COVID-19 just from day-to-day exposure in that sense. So when the time comes, I think people need to make that judgment to say, is it a reaction that's potentially treatable that many people aren't even hospitalized for versus the rare chance of me getting COVID-19 but having a significant outcome from it. And if you were to bet, you would probably bet the odds of you getting COVID-19 and getting a significant reaction is 1,000 times higher than getting a significant side effect from these vaccines.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. And Dr. Abrams.
Well, I would echo that absolutely. And it's a nice segue to say that as a result of that, really, unless you've reacted to the vaccine already, or unless you're known to have an allergy to the component, and the big one so far at least seems to be PEG, you can get this vaccine just like anyone else.
Great. Okay, thank you so much. I'd like to go back to our poll question, okay, because we're clearly out of time. We've got we'll run over by a couple of minutes, but let's put up our poll question and see how we've done in terms of helping people get the information they need. So the first poll question: do you have the information you need to confidently make a decision on the COVID-19 vaccine? And our second question is, how hesitant are you in your decision to take the COVID-19 vaccine? So unfortunately, I couldn't see those poll results. I suspect we probably still have some questions that need to be answered. And certainly that's why we want to go through what's next. So in terms of what's next, we have a post-session survey that will come up, and we really want to be able to understand so we can develop our FAQ document, as well as inform some additional webinars to answer questions you may have. So we need your feedback through these surveys. A short survey will pop up on your screen immediately after the webinar, and it will ask you to complete it, or you can get a survey within an hour via email if that's the time that you have available. But we really appreciate if you would take some time to complete it, as it will help us understand the information needs. I'd also like to thank our supporters. As you know, we're a charity and we're reliant on the generosity of the community and organizations for our programming, to offer free programming. If you enjoyed this webinar, please consider a donation to Food Allergy Canada. We'd like to recognize and thank the Walter Maria Schroeder Foundation, the Sean Delaney Memorial Golf Classic, and EpiPen, as well as the Peanut Bureau of Canada for their funding contributions for this webinar. Thank you for your participation today, and as a reminder, a recording of this webinar will be made available in the coming days. This concludes our webinar.